All right. I've been looking forward to this show for a long time, George. This is a big deal here. The Russian docs from 2 trips that you made to Russia are going to be revealed on our website. We're going to have more details here in the show. But you made 2 trips, testified before Congress about it. We'll get to some of that testimony in a moment. 93 and 96. How did those trips come about? What made you want to go there, and how did it happen?
I was curious about Russia. It was a tumultuous time for them. The Berlin Wall fell, Gorbachev quit, Yeltsin was elected. They were experimenting with democracy and capitalism, glasnost, perestroika. And I was wondering, well, look, the Russians were a superpower. The USSR was a superpower. They probably had to have their own UFO studies. I'd heard bits and pieces. I wonder how I could get it. Well, I had no Russian contacts, no way to get in. I'd seen an article in the New York Times about the KGB releasing its files on Oswald, and I thought, geez, if we could get into the Russian files, we would learn more about what the American government knows from the Russians than we'd ever learn from the American government itself. And I met this Russian physicist with help from Congressman Jim Bilbray. He was in our country to lecture about nuclear disarmament. He had great contacts. He'd been the national security advisor to Yeltsin and to the Russian parliament, trained Russian cosmonauts. And I met with him, had a couple of beers, asked if he knew anybody who knew about UFOs. He promised to give it a try. 8 months later, he'd worked up some sources who had never spoken to media, Russian or American, ever about UFOs, and they agreed to talk to us. So off we went.
Okay. We're going to have some of those stories that you did back then. We dug deep into the files to get the stories back from 96. Wow, it's now 30 years ago here as we're sitting here. But first, you testified before Congress September of 2025, and you told them about the Russian documents. Here's part of your testimony.
Back in the early 90s, I got into Russia, met with a number of their defense officials, Ministry of Defense and others, who confirmed for me that Russia had been doing the same thing that the United States had been doing, that is, secretly studying UFOs while publicly saying something completely different. The documents and interviews that I obtained and have now shared with this task force show that the USSR launched what is almost certainly the largest UFO UAP investigation in the world. The first phase of that was an order was sent out to the entire USSR military empire that every unit, you see anything strange in the sky, a craft, an orb, something unusual, you had to gather all the evidence, collect testimony from the witnesses, look for physical evidence, and all of that information went into one program at the Ministry of Defense. Thousands and thousands of these reports came in. A lot of them were first routed to the KGB, but then back to another program that came after this collection effort called Thread 3. And Thread 3 was an analysis program. We have provided to the committee the documents of what they were trying to do, and essentially they were trying to build their own UFOs. They were using the information from their observations and studies to try to figure out that technology. The guy who was in charge of that program, Colonel Boris Sokolov, told me that their goal was to basically develop technology that would be superior to anything we had, based on what they learned from UFOs.
You handed over the docs to them. What have they done since? Do you know anything? What is it? And we're going to have the docs for you, by the way. That's one of the things that we're going to do is you're going to release them publicly.
Yeah, I provided copies of several of the most important documents from Russia and the translations, English translations, to that committee, and gave them permission to go ahead and publish it or put it in the Congressional record. They haven't done so, and I think I defer to them because there might be legitimate reasons. It's a lot to absorb. And for Congress, they want to be able to confirm it on their own. And some of these translations of the original documents are kind of funky. That's the condition I got them in when I first commissioned some translators, Russian language folks. They haven't made them public yet, so we're going to do it on Mystery Wire. We're posting some really important stuff, very juicy, about those secret Russian classified programs, putting them online, and people can read it for themselves, including some spectacular dramatic incidents that happened that threatened the outbreak of World War III.
The fingers were on the buttons. The codes were ready to go from your stories from back then that we're going to show you here. One of the key questions was Tim Burchett. By the way, I love his Nashville accent. He gets there and talks. He asked you what I think is a key question during your testimony. Here it is.
How did you manage to obtain the classified Russian UAP documents, and how did you get them back in the United States?
Well, I met this Russian physicist who was in the United States lecturing.
And I want to clarify that. I can't even take a thing of honey home on my airplane when I fly back to Tennessee.
Yeah,
so
I did something pretty dumb.
And I'm bitter about it, but go ahead.
I did something kind of dumb. I met with these officials who, during that time period, glasnost, perestroika, the Russians were trying to open up to the world, and I saw it as a window of opportunity, and it was. And we were able to talk these folks into providing us information that otherwise we would never have seen. Some of that was classified. I found out that they only stamped the top pages of these documents that were classified, so I just removed them. I removed those pages, and I carried them out. And if they'd caught me, I'd be in a gulag still.
Yeah. We'd be saying, what happened to George Knapp? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what happened to George Knapp? He's here. He's not in a gulag, thank goodness. What are we talking about with documents? I mean, give me some idea. I'm trying to get this many pages, or we get files?
Yeah, somewhere around in there.
Okay,
yeah, I mean, altogether
like that. Okay,
because I got reports also from their national academies of sciences. Various academies had helped the government study this stuff. There were sort of a debunker group as well. It was a pretty good pile of stuff, and like I said in that document, it was foolhardy. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know I was going to get all this stuff when I went there, so I didn't have a plan on how to get it out. And it was a spur-of-the-moment idea just to take off the top pages that were stamped, classified, and I carried those. If you've ever been to Moscow, you go through six different security stops to get out. I was sweating it pretty good all the way through.
Any one of those...
Yeah, that would be the end of me.
Could have been trouble for you, certainly, at that time. And it was still 96. Now, I love how Las Vegas and Nevada, and this, I'm getting a little off topic here, but the Cold War, we were right at the center of everything going on during that time with Russia here in Las Vegas.
Sure.
With the test site, Area 51, nuclear tests that happened.
Yeah. I don't think it's exaggeration to say...
We were ground zero.
Yeah. I don't think
Really.
it's exaggeration to say the Cold War was won here in Nevada. Those folks out at Area 51 with those spy planes and different technologies, they were working on Star Wars-type programs. I think that the men and women out there toiling in obscurity helped to push Russia over the edge and helped to bring that wall down.
Okay, George, when we come back, we're going to have one of those stories. We're going to have two of them during this entire show here. But one of the stories that you did, the first one that you did in 1996, we're going to go in the Wayback Machine, but you'll enjoy it next on Mystery Wire. Okay, the unveiling of the Russian documents for you here on Mystery Wire tonight. You went to Russia in 1993, 1996. You didn't go by yourself. Who else was on that trip?
Two people who had worked here at KLAS, Brian Gresh, who was an anchor and reporter, and Bryant Blackburn, who was both of them good friends of mine. Bryant had been the chief photog here. They both agreed to go. Brian Gresh also learned to shoot video so that we had two cameras on the ground. It was an amazing time in Russian history, tumultuous demonstrations every day. The Yeltsin had taken control of the airwaves. Their White House, which is their parliament, was surrounded by troops. It was crazy.
Did you have an interpreter? You had to have had.
Hired two different interpreters at different points. We hired drivers, and it was just one of the great experiences of my life.
Okay, here's one of the stories, the first one that you did when you got back. This aired in 1996 here on KLAS TV.
March 1991, radar at the Leningrad airport detects first one, then two, then three unidentified objects hovering over a nuclear plant. From a dead stop, the UFO zipped away at 2,000 miles per hour. The Urals, 1976. A photographer clicks this shot and later provides a more detailed drawing. May 1992, a military team in the Kola Peninsula tapes this spinning object. In Tbilisi, a crew shooting a music video spots this overhead. Today, average Russians are free to discuss UFOs, but it wasn't always so. Through the 50s and 60s, the Kremlin declared UFOs a capitalist creation, thus a non-topic. But behind the scenes, Stalin and other leaders authorized secret UFO studies. Retired Colonel Boris Sokolov commanded such a study for 10 years. The entire Russian military took part. Thousands of reports were generated, but were kept secret until 1993, when Sokolov first spoke to us. The study included 40 incidents of Russian warplanes encountering UFOs. One MiG had its wing damaged in a collision with a UFO. This former pilot says a UFO disabled his plane with a beam of light. In 1982, a UFO hovered over a nuclear missile base in the Ukraine for hours. Unexplainably, codes were entered and the missiles were ready for launch until the UFO vanished. General Igor Maltsev, for 7 years commander of the entire Soviet air defense system, recalls a UFO flap over Moscow in 1990. Hundreds of visual and radar observations by military personnel. Maltsev confirms his standing order was, "Don't fire on the UFOs," but he declines to say much else. His boss, the former deputy defense minister, declined to speak altogether under orders. And even Sokolov is now reluctant to talk, in part because he was attacked in communist newspapers following our 1993 interview. There's more than one kind of chill in the Moscow air these days.
With the double political whammy of the revived communists and the scary nationalists, the Russian government needs a UFO expose like it needs a red, white, and blue paint job on the Kremlin.
Science has received the message. Individuals and the Russian Academy are now downplaying their long-term studies of UFOs. Oddly, the KGB has opened up, including a release of this long secret film of a UFO. KGB adds it has no ongoing interest in flying saucers, although it does have several hundred files.
I'm going to call this stuff priceless. When you look back on that video, what are your thoughts? It's probably been years since you've seen it.
Well, you know, it was there was a window of opportunity there because of the changes that took place in Russia, and I knew there were a good chance that that window would close, and it has. 1993, we got nothing but cooperation, and people were willing to talk to us, share information. By 1996, after I released some of this in news reports and in public presentations, the people who were very cooperative with us were scared to death to even know us, and they clammed up. They wouldn't talk to us anymore because by that point, the Putin-esque Putin group was on the rise, and dark clouds were in the sky.
Yeah, and the political aspect of that time was important. As you said, the wall had fallen, but still there was some resistance. And they're not going to let us know, the U.S. know everything they know. They didn't want you to know. I'm guessing they didn't, but you had sources that wanted to reveal stuff.
You know, and there was just a feeling in the air. Hey, it's time for us to rejoin civilization. You know, and they were attempting to bring investors in and capitalism and bankers and make a run for it. And that ended. That changed. It's gone.
Okay, we've got part 2 of your Russian document story from now 30 years ago is the time we're doing this show, but from 1996, and also more of your testimony in Congress, some interesting thoughts about what happened to some of those people in Russia after you were asked that by Congress. So Mystery Wire will return as we're revealing and unveiling the Russian documents here tonight. More right after this. Okay, George's Russian documents revealed here tonight. I want to jump right into part 2 of your story.
Sure.
It was fascinating, certainly, to see that. And here's the second part of this story, done back in 1996 after George returned from his second visit to Russia.
Awakening to a young Bruce Willis spouting Russian is the first sign you're not in Kansas anymore. But then the ad for Ginzu knives lets you know it's not Oz either. Western influence is far more pronounced here today than under the communists, but capitalism and democracy are still hanging on by their fingernails. Just getting to Moscow is daunting in itself, up to 22 hours by air from Las Vegas. Even in early April, temperatures hovered close to zero most of our visit. Some 400 people froze to death on Moscow streets this winter. While the domes of the historic landmarks still gleam with gold, the vast majority of the population is dirt poor. Driving in this city is motorized Darwinism, complete chaos punctuated by traffic as solid as cold magma. Anyone with money is considered mafia, the generic term for criminals. Many of the newly wealthy made theirs in one of Moscow's 10 or so casinos, which cater to Western tourists, but whose Spartan interiors and barren ads could use a little Las Vegas pizzazz. We were in Moscow to establish ties with military officials concerning secret UFO studies. The Ministry of Defense admitted to us 3 years ago that such studies were a top priority. Hundreds of documents and photos were made available to us. This time, we interviewed the former Soviet air minister, the highest-ranking Russian to ever talk about UFOs with a Western journalist. But Moscow was only the first stop. After being busted trying to videotape a near whiteout at the airport, it was a 9-hour stormy jaunt to the end of the earth, Vladivostok, a crime-infested seaport where our hotel's room service menu offered bodyguard service. The sarcastic reference is to our ride on this ancient chariot through snowstorms and vast emptiness, sometimes at treetop level, to the gritty industrial town of Dalnogorsk, where in 1986 something like the Russian Roswell occurred. Witnesses saw an object crash into this mountain. Scientists have analyzed the strange debris, but don't know what they have. Back on the chopper, back on the plane, and back to Moscow, where the Russians have learned enough to use perky people on their newscasts. And my guess is this guy does their street talk.
And the street talk reference there is towards you, a commentary that you did called Street Talk here at the time. So, okay, what are we going to see in these Russian documents? Enjoyed that story, by the way, but what are we going to find?
The first document we're making public, it's a Russian version, and the translation is about a bone-chilling incident in 1982 at a Russian ICBM base that's in what is now Ukraine. UFOs appeared above this base, over and around them for a couple of hours, making these incredible displays. And then suddenly, at the launch control system for the missiles, the codes that it lit up without anybody pressing a button. Someone entered the correct codes for launch, and the Russian missiles were enabled. Now, it'd take 25 minutes for one of them to get to New York City and obliterate it, and they couldn't stop it. The UFOs go poof, they're gone. The launch control system goes back to normal, and World War III was averted.
But they don't know. They still don't know who, as far as you know, how it happened, who did it.
Colonel Sokolov told me he sent a team of experts. Wow. They went to that base. They took apart the launch control system, couldn't find anything wrong, don't know how it was done. But in his opinion, it was the UFOs that did it, and they were trying to send some kind of message, whatever that message is.
That we are sort of in charge, perhaps, and we could start World War III if we wanted to.
Yeah. No, we don't want to. But look, the same thing has happened in the U.S. Multiple U.S. missile bases have been overflown by UFOs, and our nuclear missiles were disabled, were taken offline by whatever these things were. It's scary, and it's serious, and it really did happen. And those are the documents we're going to unleash tonight or this week.
Also, Congressman Burchett talked to you about what happened to the people in Russia that you talked to. Was one of his other questions to you when you testified in Congress. This was September of 2025.
What happened to the Russians that came forward to you in 1993, and were there any repercussions for them?
Well, there were. The first thing that happened when I talked about this after getting back and going through the files and things and sifting through it, the Russian physicist who had helped us introduced all these people wrote back and said there was a huge eruption, that there was the real right, far autocratic forces that wanted a return of the USSR had really go after these guys. They described them as traitors. Nikolai Kapranov, the physicist friend of mine, said, look, if this had happened 5 years earlier, we would be in prison. If it had happened 10 years earlier, we would have been shot. Right. Luckily, at that point, Putin was not in power, but none of those people that we talked to on that trip in 1993 would ever talk to me again. I went back in 1996, and it was like I had the plague. I spoke to different people, but they were scared.
No, that's a good distinction from the two trips. Okay, we got 2 minutes left here. Sure. Some of the other stuff we're going to find in these Russian documents.
Thread 3. So I think this is probably the consequential document that we're going to release. But Thread 3 was a program that came after the one that was run by Sokolov. They gathered all this information up. They gave it to this other program, which analyzed it. They were watching the U.S. media and watching UFO developments in our country and throughout Western nations. They were studying it for very clear purposes. They wanted to build their own. And some of the cases that are in these Thread 3 documents are absolutely stunning, just crazy, where people are frozen right in place, can't move by flying saucers. They had crashes, they had landings, they had materials that they wanted to study in order to achieve superiority over the Americans. That was the goal of that program. That was, a long, long time ago, long before we started doing that.
And these are UFO appearances that nobody has heard about before,
Right.
other than we're in the documents, and we don't have enough time here to talk about them fully, or on a TV newscast.
Russian cosmonauts, the first few cosmonauts that went up had encounters in outer space. And the Russian government didn't want them to talk about it, but years later, they did. Like our astronauts have seen stuff up there, and we don't really, our government doesn't really want them to talk about it either.
Okay, so where can we find the documents? You want to go check them out?
Yeah, it'll be on Mystery Wire. We're posting the whole thing.
Go there, check it out, mysterywire.com. You can also go to the 8 News Now website. They cross together eventually, is how they will do. So check them out and see a little Russian. It's translated into English. You get the English version.
We'll give some Russian versions as well. I don't speak or read Russian or Cyrillic, whatever it's called, but we'll be posting additional documents, maybe one every week or so.
Okay, we're good. Yeah. We're glad you got out and you're not in a gulag.
Me too.
Still to this day. Okay.
Yeah, me too. I like the Russians, by the way. I met a lot of Russians. They're great.
We're going to talk more about this issue, certainly, as we release more documents. But thank you for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed Mystery Wire. Bye for now.